In my PhD, I investigate the role of clothing and its connection to the process of nation building in Uzbekistan from the 1920s on. In this process, the Parangi, the full body veil, was banned and combated, starting with the Unveiling Campaign 1927, as it was incompatible with Soviet modernity, and the tibiteka, a small Muslim hat, became the symbol of the new Soviet citizen. Until today, discourses about appropriate national clothing are present in Uzbekistan, where, for instance, a second unveiling campaign is taking place against the hijab, a new form of veiling in Uzbekistan. In a broader sense, I'm concentrating on discourses about civilization, modernity, hygiene, and tradition, which were debated during the Soviet era and continue until today. In this presentation, I will focus mostly on Soviet posters and just at the end give possibilities how this oversimplified image can be contrasted and how, in general, one can work in a state of crisis. The word tibiteka designates a Muslim headgear, which can be round or canonical, and which was and is still worn not only in Central Asia, but also by other Muslim communities in Ukraine and Russia. Tibiteka was formed out of the Tatar word tibite, which means elevation or top, and the Russian suffix ka. Even though regional names exist, as for example, it is called dopi in Uzbekistan, the name tibiteka is still very common, not only in the Russian-speaking press, but also on social media or among German or English travel agencies and blogs. I will use it throughout the presentation because I talk mostly about the Soviet press, but it is not a political standpoint. You see in the second images a postcard where you see different forms of tibitekas. You see there are different patterns and also different colors, and yeah, I will talk about that later. And there are two reasons why the tibiteka became very popular in the 1920s and 30s. On the one hand, workers came to Uzbekistan from other republics as for the building of the Fergana Canal. They were wearing the tibiteka in solidarity, and when coming back to their home countries, they often brought some tibitekas back. In this way, the tibiteka became very popular, and especially students and the intelligentsia were starting to wear it, because by then it also became very fashionable. However, the more important reason was the hujum movement, literally attack, which started on Women's Day 1927. The parangi, a full body dress worn with a dark horsehair veil called the chachvan, became the main target of this movement, and the female body, the battlefield for modernization. You can see in the first image the parangi and the chachvan as it was worn in cities like Tashkent in the 30s and 20s. Soviet modernizers organized mass unveilings of the Soviet party to unveil their wives. Many of the voluntarily or involuntarily faced not only criticism, but were murdered. While the Soviets made unveiling their program, it is until now very often ignored that before the revolution, Jadids, a local Muslim community, advocated for reforms and women's emancipation. Unveiling was by then already in discussion. When the unveiling became a Soviet program, removing the parangi was seen in direct link with the support of the state, the Soviet state, and its modernist mission. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, new research proved that the parangi wasn't actually a mass phenomenon before the 20th century, but it became it as a reaction to foreign domination. This abandonment of the parangi is in direct link with the tibiteka. The hujum fueled the Tibeteka's popularity, as the local population adapted it as the actual headgear. Until then, it was only worn by children and young girls without other accessories. Women wore it in combination with one of several headscarves, and men tied around a piece of usually white cloth into a turban. However, before the revolution, there was also a variety of other headgears among women, and some women did not wear neither a parangi, nor a tubiteka, nor a headscarf. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about this parangi and the tubiteka in Soviet posters. In the posters from the 1927, 1930, the veil is a very common subject. It is interesting, it is not just about the veil as a sign of backwardness, but that is linked to many other questions. Like in the first poster, where we see Uzbek woman uncovering her face with the finger in the air, reminding that the peasant woman has to restore her rights. In the second one, we see the relation to labor, a woman in a workforce. We see on the left a queue of veiled women, one that is unveiling while a Soviet woman is showing her the way to work. There are weaving machines operated by women in tubitekas with a headline, "Free yourself, then enter the production." Where we see women working in cotton fields, and the last one says, "Enter the kolkhoz." In this way, the poster encouraged women's emancipation, and emancipation means in this way working in a Soviet structure, as in the fields or in the new companies. In the third poster, we see a doctor with a torch, left to him a Uzbek family, some of them wearing the tubitekas. The man is wearing a turban, which in this poster in the 1930s sometimes is the case, but will be gradually abandoned because the turban is deemed as a religious symbol. However, in this image we see the torch is illuminating the mullah, which is treating patients next to him. There is a Quran with a spider, and here we see again this link of religion and superstition. Most of the people in the queue are veiled women wearing the parangi, which in this case links the parangi to questions of hygiene. We see that the parangi here not only prevents women to work, but also the parangi prevents women to seek real medication, which in turn signifies that this is a harmful thing. Even though I also look at posters and movies from the 1980s and 1990s in my PhD, I won't talk about them in this presentation. Nearly 20 years later, in the magazine The Peasant Woman, the discourse about hygiene, enclosure, and salvation in relation to the parangi continues. I will read a passage from this article which is referring to the parangi. Aside, I recall the sayings of my mother, Lozikat Akhmetova, about the heavy past. The Uzbek woman could not show herself with an open face in the street. She was wearing the parangi and a chachvan. The long coat and the veil made of black horsehair were the symbols of her slavery. She was facing fate, a stabbing with the knife if she dared to remove the parangi. The Sharia law forbid her to wash the parangi and the chachvan. Women were walking around in stained and dusty clothes from one year to another, talking about the position of Uzbek women and women of other nationalities of the East. The founder of the Soviet Union, Lenin, rightly said that they were the most oppressed of the oppressed. End of quote. While we see the same narratives as in the posters 20 years ago, we see also images of the laureate of the Stalin Prize, both her and her daughter wearing the tubiteka in the left corner. Above there are images of a modern street in Tashkent with a bus. On the other page, we see a group of women again in tubitekas in front of the National Theatre and below the Library of Tashkent. The recall of the feeling at the contrast between then and now, and show how especially the life of women have improved. In a way, the Parangi here again is not only linked to closure, but also again to a lack of hygiene, to a lack of clothing. To other posters, in both cases, we can see that there's a direct link established between the Tubiteka and the Uzbek nationality, because the Tubiteka becomes the marker of the Uzbek nationality and therefore can be recognized by others in the Soviet space. While a certain image of Uzbek nationalities were crafted often at distance, local people in Soviet Uzbekistan were not just observing the image, but in a daily life, they were negotiating their own understanding. And for instance, there are different studies about clothing and consumption that show that people were combining modern and traditional clothes, and the choice was sometimes political and sometimes personal and varying from context to context. It was not that simple that people were wearing modern clothes in the city or traditional one in villages, but it was depending on each context. For example, people could wear for work more modern clothes because it was expected, but when coming home wear their traditional clothes. So this image that we see here, that the Uzbek people were wearing the tubiteka all the time, in a way is very simplified. And in these two posters, you see people again always wearing the tubiteka. In the first one, a Uzbek woman and a Uzbek man are offering cotton to Stalin, while evidently occupying a position much lower in the corner of the image. This linking of the cotton plant and the cotton production to the Uzbek nationality is an achievement of the Soviet Union. Not only in posters, but also in movies, it is repeatedly utilized. And second poster, we see Pushkin coming to Uzbek children which are wearing colorful tubitekas and bringing them culture. But it is interesting sometimes to turn the image around and ask if Ulugh-Bek, Uzbek scientist, would come and visit Russian children. This would be unthinkable. In this way, we can observe that even though the Soviet Union tried to craft independent nationalities with their own signifiers, that the first place was always reserved for the Russian people and the Russian culture. After the independence, Uzbekistan tried to distance itself from the Muslim countries, as for the neighboring Afghanistan, and is opting for secular Islam, even though it is deeply influenced by the Soviet experience. In this framework, other forms of Islam, which are not in harmony with the state's vision, are combated. The hijab, which became very popular in the last 10 years, is forbidden in public institutions, as it is, in words of the Uzbek president, a symbol of religious extremism and a foreign symbol. In this way, a second Hujum unveiling campaign is happening against the hijab. Women are forced to take off the hijab in streets or before school buildings. Nearly 100 years later, clothing again is used to negotiate national identity. There are items of clothing which are promoted by the state and others which are banned, even though now we're not anymore in the Soviet Union, but in an independent state. And this was the first part of my research that is very important for my PhD, but but as I'm doing also an artistic PhD, the second part would be incorporating this whole research into an artistic work. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And my initial plan was before Corona happened, to go to Uzbekistan, visit museums and archives, as well as conduct ethnographic research. However, all of this was impossible due to Corona because I had to postpone the travel, which I'm not sure can happen this year or next year. It's a very uncertain situation. But then at the moment, in my artistic practice, I dived a little bit deeper into the materiality of the Tibeteka, and I looked how the materiality was influenced by the Soviet experience. And I read that the Tibeteka, starting with the Soviet Union, there were more and more imported fabrics and chemical dyes that influenced the colors of the Tibeteka. And before the Soviet Union, the Tibeteka was done at home or in small workshops. And in the Soviet Union, after the collectivization, the Tibeteka was done either in state-controlled workshops or in factories. And within these factories and workshop, there was an artist designer who was responsible for the patterns, who was supervising the workers. And the workers were usually craftsmen or craftswomen from the local community. There were Uzbek people, and they had just to do what the designer artist was saying. The designer artist was usually Russian or from another Soviet republic. In this way, one can see that there was, even though the Soviet Union was promoting equality of nationalities, there was within the organization of labor already a hierarchy. And then in 1960s and later on, the Soviet Union was thinking to incorporating signs of modernity into the Tibeteka, like the rocket, the car, the acronym of the Soviet Union. And in this way, Tibeteka's significance also shifted, because it was not anymore a personal object which was done by hand by somebody else, but it was often an object that was done in a company, signs connected to the Soviet Union, connected to the state. In this way, it became like a surface for propaganda. And as I cannot travel anymore, I try to think about possibilities, how to work in a state of crisis. And my ideas for further development are the following. I am in contact with Uzbek people living in Switzerland, and I want to gather personal accounts which will contrast the one version of history given by the Soviet Union. Throughout the interviews, people can tell me their stories, narrate moments in a subjective way. I want to question people about the relation to the national costume and their representation. And then, as the Tibeteka, I haven't much talked about it, the symbols on the Tibeteka were initially symbols for protection against evil eye, for good luck or good health, and so on. And as we are in a state of crisis, I would like to work with this idea of protection and also ask people which symbols they need for protection in these times. And through these interviews, I would elaborate new symbols connecting to symbols used in the past in order to create a subversive history.